Israeli troops are on the ground in Gaza this morning. They aren't calling it an invasion, but the tanks won't leave anytime soon. Gaza is, now more than ever, a battlefield. There's no power coming into the Strip and hardly any independent news coming out. Israel's foes and some others claim it's a war crime. Tens of thousands march through the streets of London, and Tory Labour unity comes under pressure. In spite of all this, Rishi Sunak wants attention to focus on artificial intelligence. Even the algorithms will see that as a challenge. Michelle Donelan will give us the very latest from the government as it tries to get Britons out of Gaza. The Science and Technology Secretary joins us ahead of the UK's AI Summit next week. The Labour leadership finds itself at odds with many in the party over the conflict in the Middle East. Shadow Science Secretary Peter Kyle tells us whether Keir Starmer can heal the divide. Tens of thousands have again protested for the Palestinian cause in London. With the police under pressure and anti-Semitism rising, I'll be joined live by the head of the country's biggest force, Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley. Tzipi Livni was the Israeli foreign minister. After yet more heavy bombardment of Gaza and many more deaths, we'll go live to Tel Aviv to ask whether this approach can ever lead to lasting peace in the region. And with us throughout the morning, three independent-minded expert insiders. Lionel Barber is the former editor of the Financial Times. Stephanie Flanders is the head of Bloomberg Economics. And Sir Mark Lyle Grant was the UK's National Security Advisor and representative to the UN. Welcome to Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Last night, the Israeli Prime Minister told his country that they were in for a long and difficult fight. The people of Gaza, as far as we know, are bracing themselves for an extended ordeal. How long, no one knows. Here, communities are dividing and political leaders are increasingly unsure how long they can keep a united front in support of Israel. What is certain is that there's no purely military solution to this conflict. But it's not so easy to see what is the political answer, what it might be, or even where it might come from. But let's try. In a moment, I'll speak to former Israeli Foreign Minister Tzipi Livni. But first, to get a clearer picture of exactly what is happening, let's speak live to our Defence and Security Editor, Deborah Haynes, who's in Sderot, near the Gaza border. Good morning, Deborah. What is the latest situation as far as you can see?
Good morning. Well, we're on morning 2 of this ground operation. It's an invasion in any other word in terms of the troops have gone in and they've stayed in. I can say that from this morning we heard that what you're hearing there is outgoing rounds. There's an Israeli artillery position just over to my right, and they are sending rounds into Gaza City, which is behind me over the hilltop. And I can say from this morning we heard a lot of gunfire, small arms fire, as well as heavy machine gun fire. And that was different to yesterday morning when we were here. As well, there have been these artillery rounds going in. And we've also seen in the distance a tank that opened fire with what seemed to be maybe some kind of smoke round to conceal the movement of troops. And as our cameraman was watching, he filmed troops on the ground walking and emerging through the smoke, heading in the direction of this city. We know that they're on the ground. Israel says that they need to have a ground operation in order to achieve their objective, which they've said is to destroy Hamas and also to achieve the release of more than 200 hostages being held captive inside Gaza. But as well, there's enormous pressure and concern on the growing toll being paid by the Palestinian civilians who are living in there.
Deborah, thank you very much for that update. Stay safe. Let's go to Tel Aviv now and speak to the former Israeli Foreign Minister, Tzipi Livni. Good morning, Ms. Livni.
Hello.
Hello. Can we start by clarifying what Mr. Netanyahu said last night. He spoke of a new phase in a long and difficult war. This is an invasion.
Yes, this is part of it, yes.
He said also that, yes, that Israel's principal objective here is the eradication of Hamas, or at least its military capacity. And he put that above the rescue of the hostages. Is that an acceptance that the Israeli government now thinks that some of those hostages may not come back alive?
I think that the Israeli government is trying to do both. It's quite a difficult goal, given that Hamas will try to use or abuse the situation and use the hostages. But yet, according to my understanding, they are trying to put the pressure on Hamas and hopefully release the prisoners as well, the hostages as well. Not an easy task, and we'll see in the future whether they succeeded.
But the fate of the hostages will not be essentially something that prevents military action to fulfill the first objective, which is the eradication of Hamas's military capacity.
The objective of Israel is to stop Hamas from attacking Israelis, doing these atrocities that we just saw a few weeks ago. And we tried in the past just to reach deterrence or to reach an agreement with Hamas, and it didn't help. So since 2005, almost 20 years, there is no one Israeli soldier in Gaza Strip. We dismantled all the settlements, and Hamas is continuing in attacking Israel. And the last atrocities, things that are really crimes against humanity, is something that we cannot take it anymore. And so the objective is to act against them, to dismantle them, to stop them, and to give security to Israel. So the hostages, of course, is the main goal as well, because the families are waiting, because they were abducted, and we are talking about women and children and babies. But I do believe that while Israel is acting militarily, the role of the international community is put the pressure on Hamas through Qatar, that is financing and supporting Hamas to release them without any conditions at all.
I want to come back
This is a humanitarian issue.
Thank you. I want to come back to talk to you about the issue of how one might deal with Hamas. But if I may just stick with the military action for the moment, and the point you've just made about the attitude of the international community, there is an increasingly acrimonious war of claim and counterclaim about who is actually carrying out atrocities. And I want to put to you what the EU's head of foreign affairs has said in the past 24 hours. He said, Gaza is in complete blackout and isolation while heavy shelling continues. The United Nations Relief and Works Agency warns about the desperate situation of Gaza people without electricity, food and water. Far too many civilians, including children, have been killed. This is against international humanitarian law. It is a direct accusation at Israel.
So at first, maybe this is the time to remind the EU that when Israel left Gaza Strip, the EU took responsibility with the United Nations on Rafah crossing between Gaza Strip and Egypt to prevent infiltration of weapons. And when Hamas took over Gaza Strip, they just left. So there is no comparison between these terrorist organizations that act against, make crimes against humanity. I truly don't want even to speak about the rape, the cutting heads and organs and sending pictures to families how they are killing their own loved ones when we are trying to prevent this from happening. And therefore, Israel called the civilians in Gaza City to leave the city because Hamas is hiding there. Tunnels underneath hospitals and within the city, and we are enabling the international community to transfer all the humanitarian needs to the Palestinians that left Gaza Strip to the south. This is our only responsibility according to the international law. There is no place in the international law that forces a country to provide its enemies the possibility
International law might say that Israel is the occupying power in Gaza. It controls access, it controls supplies.
Let's speak about it. Gaza is being, we have a border with Gaza Strip. We have two sides of borders with Gaza Strip. One border is between Gaza and Egypt. When we left Gaza Strip, we didn't want to close these borders. In fact, we hope that they can build a new Singapore there. But instead of doing the best for their life, Hamas took over and is using all the money that it gets in not for the population, but for rearming.
Forgive me, I discussed that several times with representatives of the Israeli government, and I understand the point. May I just come back to the war aims here? Mr. Netanyahu says that the aim is to eliminate Hamas's military capacity, to clear out the hundreds of miles of tunnels and so on. Do you genuinely think that this is going to be possible as a military exercise to eliminate Hamas?
We have no other alternative. As I told you before, I was a member of the Israeli cabinet during military operations against Hamas. Once we tried to reach deterrence, the other time we reached an agreement with. Nothing helps. So this is the only possibility. To say that this is an easy or no, it's going to be very difficult. It's not an easy task, but what's the other alternative? To live with or close to these terrorists that are just trying to infiltrate into our cities, towns, kibbutz, and kill women and children. So I hope that it's possible, but this is the role of the Security Cabinet.
Tzipi Livni, thank you very much indeed for your time this morning.
Thank you.
Well, let's see what our panel makes of all that. With us through the show are three independent-minded expert insiders. Lionel Barber is the former editor of the Financial Times. Stephanie Flanders is head of Bloomberg Economics and the former BBC Economics editor. And Sir Mark Lyle-Grant was the UK's National Security Advisor and representative to the United Nations. Lionel Barber, it seems that things are moving this morning, but perhaps not quite in the way that people anticipated, which was supposed to be a big, all guns blazing, as literally, invasion.
Well, that's what Mr. Netanyahu and his military team wanted to give the impression that it would be a full-scale invasion with tanks and leading to a sort of occupation, because remember that 300,000 reservists were mobilised, and then a sort of step-by-step attempt to eradicate Hamas. And, of course, this isn't actually feasible. You're not going to be able to completely destroy Hamas. The best you can do is to decapitate the leadership, to kill elite fighters, to tackle some of the tunnels, and then simultaneously work towards thinking about a solution for Gaza, because, as Ms. Livni has said, it is impossible for Hamas to remain in place. And they were running the place. So you've got to bring in Arab states, you need to have financing, reconstruction, drawing on Saudi Arabia, UAE. That's part of the bigger picture.
Mark Lyle-Grant, do you think that the Israelis are playing it as they wanted to, or are they essentially between what they want to do and what the international community is, if you like, restraining them to do?
I think the Israeli government's got itself in quite a difficult position. Of course, they had to respond to the horrendous atrocities by Hamas on the 7th of October, but they set very early a very high bar for their objectives, which was to completely eliminate Hamas. And as Lionel is saying, actually, is that achievable by purely military means? I don't think so. There needs to be some sort of political track alongside that, and they haven't got that. But by setting that high bar, all Hamas has to do is to show that it has survived to claim victory. And the danger is that in a combination of setting itself unrealistic objectives and trying to do that in ways that appear to breach international humanitarian law, Israel risks giving a victory to its enemies, and indeed our enemies, like Hamas and Al-Qaeda and all the other terrorist groups like ISIS.
Stephanie, people that you do business with, people who work for you, cover this region. What are they saying about essentially what's happened here and the extent to which Israel or Hamas is, as Mark's saying, realising their objectives?
I mean, it is interesting that we've reached this. It's 3 weeks since the horrific atrocities that Hamas committed against the civilians in Israel. And initially, it seemed that we would get to this stage faster. And I guess we have to. It's been a horror for the people of Gaza, but it does appear to have focused some minds in the Israeli government on not just what the immediate objective is, but as both have said, just how challenging it is to combine whatever you call the destruction of Hamas with what is supposed to be the ultimate objection, which is the security of Israel. And is the security of Israel, the ability to be, to continue to exist and to continue to keep its people safe, that unites a lot of people in giving some support to Israel. And the way you try and destroy Hamas, insofar as you can destroy it, produces a wider war and makes it that much harder to provide that basis for peace, then you're not actually securing the security of Israel. And I think, along with the hostages, the Israeli hostages, that's something that people in Israel have focused more and more on over the last few weeks. And you've seen a changing public attitude to invasion as people have thought about what is the end game for this, and how does that actually secure our peace?
Indeed, there's a poll that came out at the back end of last week in the Israeli newspaper Mariv, which showed that something like half of the Israeli public is at least anxious about invasion.
And it seems to be much less than, obviously, in the immediate wake of the atrocities.
Well, also, there was and still is a serious threat of a second front. I mean, in the north, in Lebanon, Hezbollah's dug in. If you think that Hamas had lots of rockets and drones, look at what Hezbollah has, backed by Iran. And I want to make, I think it's important to state that there's a bigger picture here. Gaza is the front line in a much wider conflict, and that is between the Hamas backed by Iran, axis of resistance. Look where now Mr. Putin, who's not quite broken with Israel and Netanyahu, but he's certainly backing Hamas right now in this conflict. And on the other side are countries like Saudi Arabia, who are looking, first of all, full break with radical Islam. We're actually moving closer to a relationship with Israel. And that's what this Hamas attack on Israel is about. There's a bigger picture here.
I think the risk of a wider conflict is certainly there. And as the land invasion goes on and more thousands of civilians are killed in Gaza, one has to keep an eye on that. But it's been quite striking to me so far in the last 3 weeks that Iran clearly does not want to get directly involved in here. Hezbollah has fired rockets and there's been an exchange of fire, but they have not thrown all their forces against Israel. They know that if they do that, they will be destroyed, and that will set them back 30 years, and they have other political objectives in Lebanon. So I think, to some extent, the deterrence that the Americans have put on the table by putting carrier groups into the region and being very direct with Iran is having some effect. So at the moment, I don't think the risk of a wider regional conflict is as strong as I would have expected.
But actually, I mean, I think that's completely right and is reassuring to some extent. But it's interesting when you talk to certainly our reporters on the ground, and I'm sure others have seen that, the debate within the Arab press around the way forward and how leaders should act. It's very clear that even if the leaders of states are wanting to preserve peace, do not see an interest in a wider conflict, the Arab street may have other ideas, especially when they see how things unfold over the next week or two. So that's where Hamas wants the pressure to be on those leaders.
All right, I want to come back and talk to you about where we think this might get to and what, in a sense, what Israel's real objective might be. Still to come on the programme, Ahead of this week's AI Summit at Bletchley Park, we'll hear from the Science Secretary, Michel Donelan. The Shadow Science Secretary, Peter Kyle, will be here to discuss the row that's engulfing Labour over its handling of the crisis in the Middle East. A day after 100,000 people once again protested through London in support of the Palestinian cause, we'll be joined live in the studio by the head of the UK's biggest police force, Met Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley. Well, let's hear from the government now. A little earlier this morning, I spoke to the Science and Technology Secretary, Michel Donelan. I'd like to begin, as we usually do on this programme at the moment, by asking on behalf of viewers with relatives and friends in the region, what do we know about the fate of British citizens in Gaza, in particular, any who might be held hostage?
So, first of all, my heart goes out to anybody who's impacted and has loved ones over there, and I can't even begin to imagine what they're going through at the moment. That's why one of our top priorities is trying to get British citizens back, also to protect all of the civilians in the area, and that's why we've been encouraging Israel to make sure that their approach, whilst obviously their right to defend themselves is a priority, but their approach has to be in line with international humanitarian law. So our representatives on the ground are trying to secure the return of our British nationals as quickly as we possibly can. We know that 950 people have already returned via the flights that we put on, and we're working with a border force on the ground as well to try and assist those returns from people that are in Gaza and want to be able to flee back for safety.
You say that you're encouraging, asking the Prime Minister of Israel and his administration essentially to have regard to international law. Israel stopped the supply of water and food to Gaza. It bombed targets inside Gaza. Unknown number of casualties. Cut off the internet and phone, so we don't quite know what's gone on in there. Yesterday, the head of the EU's External Affairs Service accused Israel of war crimes, and the accusations obviously been rejected by Mr. Netanyahu. But do you think that the EU officials' view has any justification?
I think we need to remember, why is all of this happening? This is happening because a terrorist organisation that we all recognise as a terrorist organisation brutally attacked Israel with no just cause at all, killing thousands of innocent people, leaving many others deeply injured. It was a horrific massacre on a scale of something that we haven't seen for a long time, and it was completely and utterly unjustified. And therefore, Israel absolutely has a right to defend itself, which is in line with international law. And that is very much what we believe as a government. If this happened, let's just think about it, if this happened on our shores and we were attacked in that way, would we be trying to rescue our hostages? Of course we would.
But we would not have a blank cheque to do so in any way we pleased, would we?
No, but we do need to remember the complexities here. So the complexities are that Hamas enmesh themselves and embed themselves with the people themselves. They use them as human shields. Israel is trying to defend itself. Hamas is using the Palestinian people to defend Hamas. Now, that is wrong. We know that they have tunnels all underneath. We know that they utilise public buildings. It is very difficult to get to Hamas without hurting innocent civilians. We, of course, though, have said that the priority needs to be to try and avoid doing that because we don't want to see any loss of life. Absolutely.
You say to try and avoid that, but this is war. It is chaos. There need to be rules. Have you set down any red lines for Israel? Things which it might do, to which you would have to say the UK government could no longer support you?
I don't think we need to do that because there is already structures in place. There's international law that is well established. The Prime Minister's made his views very clear. He's been to the region, so has the Foreign Secretary, and multiple conversations have been undertaken, and we've been crystal clear. We defend Israel's right to defend itself, but we absolutely believe that should be done in line with
But you know what people would say here, and I don't know about people, I'll ask you this.
Yes.
It sounds like what you said to the Israelis is, you can do whatever you want, and, OK, we know there's international law, but we know that that's always murky, but actually we'll support you come what may. Is that
No,
Right.
that's categorically not what we've said. The Prime Minister has stood there and said he backs Israel's right to defend itself, just like we would expect our own right to be able to defend ourselves were the shoe on the other foot. But that must be done within international law, and the protection of civilians must be a priority. And we've seen Israel telling the Gazan people to go to the south. We've also seen Hamas telling them not to move.
And you're clear, as far as we can tell, given that there's no news, or not been any news coming out of Gaza until this morning because the lines were cut off. You are confident that what Israel is doing right now and has done in the last couple of weeks is within international law?
Look, I'm not an international lawyer, and it isn't in my jurisdiction to make that decision. Those judgments... I
mean the government as a whole.
Yeah, well, those judgments will be made in due course based on all of the evidence. As you said a moment ago, you know, it is a fast-pacing environment. Things are happening that we aren't even aware of on the ground. Those judgments and views will be made at a later date by the relevant and appropriate bodies.
All right. We know that this conflict is spilling over into the streets of Britain itself, there are demonstrations and so on. This morning it's reported that the government is considering reviewing the law on the definition of extremism. Is that correct?
So we have a definition. It's been about since, I believe, 2011, and we believe that the current law is fit for purpose. We do have, of course, the Terrorism Act, we have the Public Order Act that the police can deploy in these types of circumstances where people are actively promoting a terrorist organisation or inciting hatred and promoting violence. And we've seen some of that happen. We've seen some arrests taking place. Home Secretary has been working with the police because we want to see a more stricter clampdown, shall we say. And, of course, we keep everything under review. Oh,
so just for clarity, because these things get about and rumours, and then everybody gets into an argument that's not necessary. There is no review on the definition of extremism planned or going on at this moment.
So everything is always kept under constant review. In terms of a formal review, what we've said to date is that we believe the existing law is robust enough and the police should be applying that in these circumstances. Of course, if we feel that over the coming weeks that's not enough, what I'm saying to you is, of course, we take further action, but we do strongly believe that the current law is fit for purpose. That's what the Home Secretary has said.
So actually, later on in this programme, I'll be talking to Sir Mark Rowley, the Commissioner of Met Police, and your message to him is, understand your point, concede that you might have a problem, but honestly, you've got enough law, get on and enforce it.
So the Home Secretary has already had those conversations with him directly about the need to apply the law robustly in these circumstances. We cannot have situations where people are protesting in a way that is aggravating violence, inciting hatred or promoting terrorism. Now, at the same time, we respect the right to...
happening?
So let me finish this point and then I'll come back to that. We 100% respect the right to protest and the right for freedom of speech and people to air their views and be concerned with certain approaches. That is absolutely fine. But there is a line, and when that line is passed, it can be dangerous for the rest of the British public. And that's why the police have been already making arrests and why the Home Secretary has very publicly urged them to continue to do so and to double down on that.
Well, this is interesting. We don't know. We don't know about these arrests. From what you have seen, have these demonstrations or parts of them or individuals within them crossed that line?
Well, yes, there have. There's been individuals holding up placards of those images to represent those people that went in just a few weeks ago.
The paragliders.
Yeah, and killed innocent babies and raped women and massacred people. And that is inciting hatred and promoting violence and terrorism.
OK, you're clear. Wearing that picture, which we've seen photos of it, is a breach of the law.
So I personally think that it is inciting hatred and it is something that the police should be looking at. They are operationally independent. It is not down to me, as Secretary of State for Science, Innovation and Technology, to dictate the decisions that the police should be making. Obviously, I'm not privy to all of the contextual information, but it does strike me as concerning that these kind of flare-ups within society could then promote further violence and tensions which could produce dangerous results for the rest of society and something that we need to be careful about.
You've entered this arena directly yourself in the last 24 hours. You wrote yesterday to the head of Research England, which funds scientific work, and you criticised a tweet by someone called Dr. Kate Sang, works in Edinburgh, I think, and called for her to be sacked from one of the Research England's committees. Her offence, according to you, is to say that she is, I'm quoting here, disturbed by the government's crackdown on support for Hamas. Now, I don't know exactly what she said because the tweet's been deleted, but are people going to be sacked for saying they're disturbed by the government's actions?
No, so what I said was this was a board that was created to promote inclusivity, diversity by UKRI. So it's a public board, people that are meant to be representing an important agenda around equality and diversity and inclusivity. And it is not appropriate, therefore, for them to be promoting extremist views. Now, I think anybody would say that if you are questioning the government's approach to a prescribed terrorist organisation, that is not only unacceptable, but also extreme. And it is a criminal offence to promote terrorism. Now, I'm not saying this individual has committed a criminal offence. I'm saying in general. So that just puts it into context. Now, surely we think that's unacceptable, surely.
That may be your opinion, might be my opinion, might be the opinion of many viewers. But Research England's an independent body. You're not alleging that this individual has broken the law. No. So is it for ministers to be telling an independent body who they should have on a committee because you don't like what she said?
So I think if you read the letter, I didn't say you must take the following steps. I said that I strongly recommend, and I
when I get a message from the Secretary of State saying I strongly recommend, I'm going to read it as get on with it.
Well, let's look at UKRI's response. UKRI's own response was that they too are deeply concerned and shocked about this, and that they are going to take action and investigate it. Now, they wouldn't be saying that if they thought everything was hunky-dory. And I don't think that anybody would suggest that is reasonable, that the promotion of terrorism is OK.
All right. This week, you're going to lead this government, our government's contribution to an international conference on artificial intelligence at Bletchley Park, with all of the wartime echoes of that and so on. What do you hope to achieve with this event?
Yes, we've been quite public about our objectives when it comes to this summit. It's the first ever global summit on AI safety. It's focusing on the frontier. Now, the frontier are the highly capable general models, and there's never been a global conversation on that. Yet it presents the biggest risks and the biggest opportunities, and we've been quite honest and open about those risks. And what we want to achieve is a deeper understanding on the risks. It is quite an unknown area to an extent because it is moving so quickly. It's the most transformative but yet most quickly moving technology that we've ever seen advancing. So we want to gain a better understanding of the risks. We want to create long-standing networks, a panel that the Prime Minister announced last week, to enable us to do that research, to really drill down, to produce a regular report. And we want to make sure that this summit is the beginning of a journey, not an end. And we want to also have a conversation about what more can the companies do. That's why the companies are coming, as well as the countries. And what guardrails can we be putting in place to ensure that the UK is safe and the rest of the world is too.
So what do you actually expect to come out of this week?
So what we expect to come out of this is a deeper understanding collectively of the risks, a process that we can all follow to drill down into those risks, a regular report coming out, a panel that is set up. We expect to really identify what more can the companies do in this space, what more can we do in terms of guardrails, and this should be the first of many summits. This is the beginning of the journey, not the end. OK, I'm a nerd, so I could talk about this forever, but I need to talk to you about something else that's happened. And I want to ask you this, not so much as a Secretary of State, but as a woman parliamentarian. Last week we saw yet another Member of Parliament caught up in the allegations of sexual misconduct. And now this seems to be epidemic on the parliamentary state. Let me just show you something. I think we can see here there are 16 members of Parliament who are now sitting as independents. They didn't come into Parliament as independents, but they lost the party whip for sexual harassment, racism, prejudice, assault, unspecified. And these are all allegations, OK? But we know. I want to ask you, how do you feel about having to work alongside these individuals? You meet them in meetings, you have to brush past them in the corridors and so on. How do you feel about this? Obviously, it's completely unacceptable to have any type of behaviour akin to this, not just in the House of Commons, but across society. And we should, I very strongly believe, be setting the right example and the right tone for others to follow. But it's certainly not my experience of working in the House of Commons. This is completely unacceptable, as I said, but it is a very small minority of people. And the vast majority of MPs, what they're focused on is working really hard for their constituencies and delivering. And that's the very reason why they entered politics in the first place. So I do think we've got to be careful that we don't cast a stain over all of us, because that's certainly not representative of the experience that I have.
So you're saying these are really bad apples, but the barrel is sort of OK?
I'm saying that not every MP has been conducting this type of behaviour, and I think we need to be careful.
I'm just saying it seems like an awful lot of people caught up in this, and I just wonder if there's something that you would want to say about the culture of the Commons particularly that seems to be producing this result.
This is a small number, but it is an unacceptable number, and it should not be tolerated. That's why we as a party have acted swiftly in any of these cases to strip the whip. The culture that I have experienced in the House of Commons is not one that facilitates or encourages this type of behaviour. In fact, it is one where people are working at extreme pace to deliver for their local people.
Michelle Donelan, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
Some reaction from our panel now. Lionel Barber, Stephanie Flanders and Sir Mark Lyle-Grant. Mark, in this situation, in your old job as the National Security Advisor, you'd be presumably in permanent session in Number 10, or from the UN, you'd be on the Zoom all hours of the day and night. I noticed that Michelle Donelan offered the opportunity to say that Israel was acting within international law. Leant back and said, I'm not a lawyer. What would you be advising her about all of that now? What would you be advising the government, I beg your pardon?
Well, I think the British government is right to stand publicly foursquare behind Israel following the atrocities of 7th October, because we know that unless you do that publicly, you will have no private influence with the Israeli leadership. But in private, I'm sure, and I would certainly be advising the Prime Minister and all other government ministers to give some quite tough messages to Israel about the way they conduct the military response to what happened on the 7th of October, and to keep within international humanitarian law. Now, I've got a legal background, but I'm not an international lawyer, but I think when they set siege to Gaza early on and cut off all essential provisions to the population there, that comes under a rubric of collective punishment, and that is illegal under international law. So I think privately officials will be advising ministers that Israel is sailing extremely close to the wind, if not already crossed the line. So and it's interesting that actually, sorry, Trevor, but Britain and America are, there is a little bit of division even in public. Britain has voted twice, both in the Security Council and in the General Assembly, differently from the Americans on Gaza resolution. So even in public, I think the British government is just being a little bit cautious in how it positions itself.
So to be clear, Mark, we've got the EU Foreign Secretary, we've got any number of NGOs, most of the Gulf states, the Saudis, who are supposed to be our allies, speaking of war crimes. And you would be saying to our government, were you in post, you've got to take this seriously.
Yes, I think you've got to take that seriously, because if this continues as it does and thousands more civilians die in Gaza, then Israel will lose completely international opinion. You've already seen some friends drifting away. I mean, France has voted against, essentially, Israel on a number of occasions recently at the United Nations. And more European countries will do that. And Israel needs its friends at the moment.
Stephanie, you're spending a lot of time in America. What do you think the Americans are thinking about all of this? Are they as anxious as Mark is suggesting the British government ought to be?
Well, they clearly, just as a nation, they clearly encompass a lot of the same tensions and concerns around their own populations as Britain does, and more so in some senses. I think it's a reminder, and certainly in the conversations I had last week, you're reminded, although we talk about a multipolar world or a bipolar world, the relative decline of America's position. When it comes to a crisis like this, America is still the only game in town, is the power that people look to. The challenge, and obviously that's much worse now than it might have been maybe in the past at different periods, is that in this particular dispute, the US being absolutely 100% behind Israel, weakens its ability to be, certainly to be any kind of honest broker in the region. And I think that's what, as you look at the Biden administration's very aggressive efforts to maintain support across the world and across the region, and apply pressure on other countries to not intervene, to prevent that wider conflict. You see that tension play out. And I think I was particularly interested in how Tony Blinken, the Secretary of State, actually had reached out to China early on and said, please, can you use your leverage with Iran? Though we've not seen China do that, really.
That's right. Indeed. I think there are hidden constraints on Israeli action in Gaza. And what I mean by that is they need to be aware of how their actions will influence what we call the Arab street. What about Jordan, the neighbour? Absolutely key person is the King of Jordan in terms of future regional arrangements, a solution, we'll talk about that, political solution in Gaza, the West Bank. He's on the front line.
2-3 million Palestinians
Indeed,
on his territory.
Refugees. Egypt, similarly. So Israel needs to be aware of the neighbourhood, of the wider game. And here, again, I think America has played an important role. If you think how everybody was writing off Joe Biden, geriatric 3 weeks ago, suddenly he's back in the game. He's influencing Israeli military tactics along with Lloyd Austin, the Defense Secretary. And crucially, he's tied assistance to Israel to assistance to Ukraine. This is very important in terms of what I was talking about earlier, the bigger picture.
Coming back to the domestic situation, Stephanie, I was slightly surprised at the robustness of Michel Donelan's defence of view that the current law is good enough, and that things that we have all seen on the telly have probably, not a lawyer and all that, but have probably broken the law. And also this idea that she's sort of telling a Quango, you can't have this person on your committees. We're going into some really quite tricky territory here, aren't we? Well,
especially if you're trying on one hand to talk about, I think she still was talking about the operational independence of the police, while still suggesting that they had been wrong not to arrest some of the people involved in that. I think this is, clearly you look at this situation and you've got a feel for the policemen and women on the beat who are absolutely at the front line of what we all fear is not going to become a much the corrosive effect on social unity and on our communities of this conflict. I mean, of course, our eyes are all rightly on the Middle East and on the casualties there, but the sort of broader effect for the UK, I do worry about the communities. And I think we have to give police the space to judge the time and the moment and the mood. Right. But equally, things that in a normal time we would have not considered to be incisive. That there has to be some kind of conditional definition. Right now, outside the Israeli embassy or wherever it is, it has a different meaning, and the police need to take that seriously.
Context matters. All right, we'll come back to this. And just after this break, I'll speak to Labour's Shadow Science Secretary, Peter Kyle.
And now it's coming from both sides, and it's moving this way.
Only about half a mile from the Turkish coast, and it's evident that the boat seriously overcrowded.
This is one of the most severe viruses in the world.
I'm Alex Crawford, and I'm Sky's special correspondent based in Istanbul.
The biggest party Tripoli has ever seen.
That's it. It got us then. There's a lot of action going on, a lot of hits going in still. We aim to be the best and the most trusted place in news. Clearly not had very much to eat at all. A lot of them extremely thin and very frail. Look at her arms. arms. I can put my entire hand round.
This is the cocktail of drugs which the doctors at this hospital have been giving their coronavirus patients. Made for people who want clarity in an uncertain world.
Mother Nature can be vicious, absolutely savage. The world's largest falls now down to a trickle in places.
I can't imagine how much plastic is lying at the bottom of this huge lake. Oh!
Close and personal with a rhino.
This is what makes the job so fantastic.
Welcome back. This is Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. The Labour leadership has been full-throated in its support for Israel and its right to defend itself. But many in the party are deeply concerned by what they see as a more lukewarm defence of the Palestinian people than necessary, and the lack of a call for a ceasefire. So just how divided is Labour over the issue? And can Keir Starmer bring the party back together again? A little earlier, I spoke to the Shadow Science and Technology Secretary, Peter Kyle. So far, Labour's been rock solid in its support for the government's posture on Israel and Gaza. Now, last night, the Israeli Prime Minister declared that the war is now in a new phase. Are you thinking about reconsidering your support for the Israeli government's actions?
It is really important that Hamas, a terrorist organisation, when it looks abroad, it sees governments and parliaments working in unanimity to challenge what is unfolding, their actions, and also their intent. So yes, Israel, we are steadfast in defending Israel's rights to secure its border, to ensure that its citizens live in safety, and also to try and retrieve the kidnapped victims. I mean, it is a personal tragedy for each and every individual, and that tragedy spreads very far and wide because there are many people on both sides of this that have a very personal connection to what is unfolding, and we have to be very, very sensitive to that. But yes, Israel does have the right to defend itself, and we are certainly supportive of that.
Your message of unity will be heard, but not everybody in the Labour Party is on the same page here. Anna Sarwar, Andy Burnham, Sadiq Khan, all want you to call for a ceasefire. And in a sense, pretty much everybody who does not owe their job to Keir Starmer seems to agree that he's got it wrong. it's probably time for him to get off the fence on this one, isn't it?
As I said, people through the Labour Party, right through the country, yearn for this conflict to end. And that is perfectly understandable. I mean, look at the horrors that are unfolding on both sides of this.
So they want you to choose a different path to the way it's resolved. Why isn't Labour leadership calling for a ceasefire when all these important figures in the party think that's the pathway?
What Keir Starmer has done is listened to all of these people in the party who have a direct connection to what is happening and an emotional connection to what is happening. He has looked at the evidence, he has looked at what is happening there in Israel and Gaza, and he has come forward with the plan for a pause for humanitarian purposes, that pause to be used so we can get food, we can get water, we can get fuel, and we can get medical supplies into where it is needed. Because, Trevor, right now, what is it? If you look at this crisis through the eyes of the people who are suffering most in Gaza, then those people need this stuff right now, today. So that is what Keir is focused on. Now, I
understand the point that you want a humanitarian pause, so does the government, but what Sarwar and Burnham and Khan are saying is you should be calling for a ceasefire. So to be clear, the Labour leader is basically ignoring the views of the three most significant figures in the Labour Party with their own independent mandate.
Keir has listened to those views and all other views that have been expressed. Now, it is a strength of the Labour Party, because we're probably the most diverse political party in Europe. It is a strength of the Labour Party that within our party we have people who have a lived connection to both sides in this conflict, and they express their views absolutely forthrightly, as they should. Keir has listened to those, looked at the situation on the ground in Israel and Gaza, and he has come up with a way forward that meets the challenges being faced by people in Gaza today. Now, what's interesting, Trevor, is he came up with this a good few days ago. Entirely at the same time that the US administration called for exactly the same. Australia did the same, and then after Keir came out, the EU did too. So we are in lockstep with our international partners, and I think all of the people and the names you've named would want Britain to be in lockstep with the international community, because that is the only way we will make a difference on the ground.
I understand it. Let's just stick with this for a moment. One of the things that the group around Sarwar and Burnham and Sadiq Khan and a lot of local councils and so on say is that Keir Starmer suggested, and I know he's tried to clarify a statement, that it's legitimate for Israel to cut off water and power to Gaza. Now, Israel's also, until this morning, cut off communications. Is all of that consistent with international law, which is a qualification that you always make? Is Israel really sticking to international law? Or, as many people in the Labour Party are saying, is it potentially guilty of war crimes?
I think we've seen, Trevor, in just the last week alone, what happens when you comment on individual actions as they unfold on the ground there. We have called for international law to be obeyed at all times, bearing in mind that Hamas did not obey international law when it crossed the border, went in and slaughtered 1,400 people and took 200 plus captive. But we are expecting Israel, in its response to that terrorist attack, to act within international law. We know that if you comment on individual actions in a position like mine and yours, we know that actually, as time passes and more of the facts become available, we are in the midst of battle. What we need to do is get a humanitarian pause in. We also need, as an international community, to start thinking about what could come next. Because this will only be solved into the long term if we get back to negotiations and we start talking about a two-state solution. It's the only long-term solution to this, and we need to start with that and move backwards. We think a humanitarian pause is that first tiny step.
I understand that. Let me just very briefly put to you what I think some of your critics within the party might say, which is that your problem as a leadership is that you have to shake off the taint of anti-Semitism, which is not this leadership's responsibility, but you've got to get rid of it. So you've got to back Israel, come what may, and that you've made a cold calculation that the votes of Muslims that you might lose, 3 million or so voters, won't matter as much as getting back the votes that you lost because of the Corbyn era. In short, you're taking Muslim votes for granted.
You've covered a lot of issues in that sentence, but the one thing I disagree with is the frame that you've put around it. We're not thinking how do we win votes or what votes we will lose at a time when there is war and conflict unfolding before us and there are human tragedies of a scale we've not seen for a very long time. There are two truths here that's unfolding. The first is that everybody has the legitimate right in a democratic society, as ours is, to advocate for two sovereign solutions within the area, the territory we're talking about. There is also, Trevor, a right and a wrong. What Hamas did was wrong, and we stand on the side of Israel within international law to defend itself. These two things can happen if we get it right, and Keir Starmer's leadership has been steadfast. He's been sensitive to the long-term challenges and listening to the voices who campaign, but he's also been steadfast in support on the right and wrong issue.
Can I just ask you about something that's come up this morning? It's reported the government may be considering reviewing the definition of extremism in law. Were they to find a new definition that might make it easier for police to make decisions on the ground, would you be supportive of that?
Well, we'll have to see what they come up with, and you wouldn't expect me to say anything else, but let me just say this. We've been calling this for 4 years. There are independent experts on terror who have been calling for this for 4 years. And what is the government focused on? It's focused on vandalising statues. All of that time wasted, all of that time wasted in Parliament on these issues which do not have an impact on the ground, that could have been used in preparing for events just like this.
That's interesting. So Labour does want a review of the extremism definition.
We have supported looking at these issues and actually what the true trends in crime are. One of them are the relationship that organisations like Hamas have within our country. And secondly, we were looking at child criminal exploitation, both of which the government ignored in order to focus on cultural issues.
All right.
So yes,
let's not go back over that.
These are the pinch points. These are the pinch points where these things actually...
You've made the point. Now, I want to ask you about something that you want to talk about. You said that Labour wants to have a new regulator to be able to overrule, as far as one can make out, the decisions of existing regulators like the Financial Conduct Authority looks after banks, the Medicine and Healthcare Regulatory Agency looks after what medicines reach the market. Would your new regulator be able to tell those regulators to change their policy, to do something different?
We want an innovation office. At the moment, we have a very complicated, we have world-class regulation, but it's very complicated and it's actually focused on individual sectors. But when you see some of the technology that's coming forward, it crosses so many different sectors, such as AI and some of the actual physical technology that's there. So what we need to do is actually pull some of the resources there and then link it with our industrial strategy so that when we have a priority as a country, because our citizens need this technology for safety or health, or our economy needs it for growth, we can pull together and then we can fast-track.
The question I was asking you was, would they be able to tell the Medicines Agency or the Financial Conduct Authority to do something differently than what they're doing now?
They can tell them to prioritise and speed up. Because at the moment, we've seen some... I mean, for example, one regulator, a health regulator, had a backlog of 800 cases pending.
You want to speed up new drugs, which would mean abandoning either maybe trials or peer review or something else. Are you sure this is safe?
Trevor, you're mischaracterising the nature of the delay. Some of these are delayed because they're in a backlog. They're stacked, waiting to get attention. If there is something that could have the transformative potential for patients or for users or to get economic growth into our economy, then it needs to go to the front of the queue and it needs to be fast-tracked forward. Not skipping things, but making sure that we get there fast and quickly and it's linked to our industrial strategy and our priorities as a country.
Peter Carr, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Trevor.
Coming up, I'll speak to this man. He's the head of the UK's biggest police force under the spotlight for policing huge pro-Palestinian protests and a big rise in anti-Semitic incidents. The Met Commissioner, Sir Mark Rowley.
5 of us have made it out of the car.
Welcome to Backstage, the film and TV podcast.
Welcome back. This is Sunday Morning with Trevor Phillips. Yesterday, some 100,000 people marched in London to support the Palestinian cause. It passed off mainly peacefully, but police are investigating potential hate crimes, and there were 9 arrests. There have been calls for stronger police action over conduct at protests and rising anti-Semitism. And it follows a year of devastating headlines for the country's biggest force, with officers convicted of horrific crimes, evidence of misogyny, discrimination, alongside concern about the number of young people killed in stabbings. The head of the Met, Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley, is with me now. Good morning, Sir Mark.
Morning, Trevor.
Now, you said that in order to be able to tackle some of the things we've seen on demonstrations, you need new legislation. We are hearing this morning that the government is talking about a new definition of extremism, but Michelle Donelan, the Secretary of State for Science, said that she thought, and the government thinks, that you've got everything you need.
So there's 2 conflicting messages. It's not for me to speak for government policy. We will robustly enforce up to the line of the law. We're approaching 100 arrests in these events over recent weeks across dealing with local hate crime and dealing with these protests. There are many appeals out there to identify some of the people, such as, for example, the 3 women with paragliders on their backs from last week. So
Have you found out who those people are?
We've had some names given to us. They're definitely the wrong names, and we've refreshed our appeal on Friday. As soon as we find out who they are, they will be arrested.
But you are pursuing those individuals.
Anybody puts their foot over the line of the law, we're going to be absolutely ruthless, and we have been, and you'll see many, many more arrests over the next week or so. But we can only enforce to the line of the law. I mean, this is a particularly challenging time, an overlay of threats when you've got state threats from Iran, you've got terrorism being accelerated by the events, and hate crime in communities. For Jewish communities, it's now about 14-fold increase in anti-Semitism in London, and for Muslim communities, it's sort of nearly 3-fold. So this is really precarious. In the middle of it, we've got these big protests, and some of what goes on there, people do find upsetting, do find distasteful, and sometimes people give an instinctive view that must be illegal. We're working with CPS in our ops room. We're doing anything we can do as soon as we see something.
You have the Crown prosecution lawyers in your operations room watching the demonstrations, and you talk to them about, can we nick that one or not?
Yeah, so because there's no point us arresting hundreds of people if it's not prosecutable. You're just inflaming things.
But there are politicians who say, you say you're being ruthless, but there are politicians who will come in here and they will say, the problem is you're not ruthless enough. Your officers are letting things go by because they're a bit worried that people are going to attack them for being, overly authoritarian and so on.
Nonsense. People with political instinct will, and sort of based on their own judgment, might say that. We're working to the letter of the law laid down by Parliament. I think the piece into this morning's Telegraph, if it's accurate, to look at the policy and legislation around extremism, I think is really important. There have been multiple reports by several different people. I was involved in one a few years ago, but also on the back of inquests. So there's a lot of evidence from the last few years that it's not right.
So to be clear, Michelle Donelan said that you had spoken to the Home Secretary about all of this week, and you have told her, we need new legislation, we need greater clarity, and this morning you still would say that to her.
So I think there is scope to be much sharper in how we deal with extremism in this country. The law was never designed to deal with extremism. We have bodies of law to deal with terrorism, bodies of law to deal with hate crime. We don't have a body of law that deals with extremism, and that is creating a gap. I'll give you one example. People were really upset last week about some of the actions at the protest of Hizb ut-Tahrir, which was one of the smaller protests last weekend. Hizb ut-Tahrir are a banned organisation across most of the Muslim world. They're banned in Germany. Our counter-terrorism prescription powers don't allow that. So there are many examples of ways that we could be different. That's for Parliament to do. Meanwhile, I've got thousands of officers working damn hard to enforce to the letter of the law.
All right. So you think that, to be clear, you think that you would want new legislation to make things clearer, simpler, and give your officers more certainty about what they can do.
No, I think the balance of free speech versus this is for Parliament to decide. But things that people are saying they want to enforce, we can't. It's up to them to decide whether they want to.
Well, let me put it as you say. It's not for us, either of us, to talk for ministers. But let me put something that Suella Braverman might say to you, were she sitting here. She might say on the Met's own website, you have a definition of hate crime. Let me remind you of what it says. It says that a hate crime is any criminal offence which is perceived by the victim or any other person to be motivated by hostility or prejudice based on a person's race or perceived race, religion or perceived religion. Now, that can include messages and pictures, and it's clear on your website. And there will be no shortage of Jewish Londoners who this morning will be saying to you, banners, chants and pictures in recent demos are motivated by hostility based on their race or religion. Why aren't you arresting the people who carried those pictures, carried those banners and made those chants?
We can go right down the rabbit hole of a technical conversation. That is about the threshold for recording an offence. That's not about the threshold for arrest or prosecution.
But it's the closest guide we get to what a hate crime looks like.
It's not in the sense of what can be prosecuted, it's not. So you picked something out of context.
OK.
What's going on is massively distasteful. Of course, it's on the back of there are thousands of innocent people who've lost their lives in the Middle East, not least Jews killed by the awful Hamas terrorist attack, but also people losing their life in Gaza. So in that, people are understandably upset and inflamed. I can't put myself in those shoes. All I can do is keep repeating. We will absolutely go to the letter of law as hard as we can do.
All right, let me put it this way to you. Whatever exact letter of the law is, most people, and I personally think this is true, that you and your officers will have applied this kind of definition to people who are offended or upset because they are black or transgender. And Jewish Londoners will be saying, I'm listening to him, and what I'm hearing is, Jews don't count.
That's definitely not the case. We're arresting tens of people across London for anti-Semitic hate crimes. We've made arrests in relation to the protests for people stirring up hate crime. We've got many more appeals out. You'll see more arrests this week. We absolutely do care.
OK, so you are doing more work in relation to hate crime. Let me just deal with one other item on this area. You've had to police 3 separate demonstrations involving tens of thousands of people in support of Palestinians, and it's all gone off, frankly, pretty well. Last Wednesday, your officers shut down a small and equally peaceful demonstration organised by the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism in support of Israel. Why?
So it wasn't shut down. There was the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism. They were driving around central London with a van with some campaigning stuff going on TV screens on the side of their van. The officers were simply concerned that driving round was going to collide with a pro-Palestinian protest, which was just wrapping up in Whitehall.
But you can see how this would.
So it was perceived as it was being banned. We were asking them to avoid a collision. We weren't saying, don't drive that round, don't protest. So all the time, officers doing fine judgments, it's of things that aren't illegal. It's never said that was illegal, saying, let's just avoid a conflict.
All right. Well, look, I mean, this isn't an issue of the confidence of individual communities, but there's a bigger issue about confidence in the force by the whole of London. We've seen the extraordinary range of things that you've had to deal with. We talked before, and you told me that you're going to sack, basically, all those people who are doing all this kind of thing. How many of you fired, and how many more do you expect to have to get rid of?
So I came back into policing after a few years out because I care deeply about it. I've got tens of thousands of fantastic officers, and as I've said many times, I've got hundreds who shouldn't be there. We have increased by 70% the sort of people we're sacking per year. Recently released data, it was about 100 in a year, and that will keep increasing over the next year or two. And there's papers you can see that we took to the London Policing Board that cover that in detail. I've got to do both. I need to motivate and support the tens of thousands of brilliant officers who don't feel they've got the kit, the equipment and the training to do their job well, and at the same time sort out the minority who are undermining the organisation. But I need to push back on some of the language. London's confidence in the Met is above average in terms of public's confidence in policing in the country. So we are at a difficult time. We've got these awful cases, and I'm operating in a paradox. The things I need to do, which is to take on these people who shouldn't be in the organisation, every one of those cases challenges trust, but we're going to do it. Meanwhile, I've got tens of thousands of people doing amazing things to protect London.
There are two groups of people who I think everybody can pretty much say have some difficulty with confidence. One is women, Sarah Everard,
yes,
all of that, but also the black community. Now, here's a tricky thing. 2 officers were sacked this week for having lied about having smelt cannabis on 2 black athletes, Bianca Williams and her partner. Following day, the public donated £50,000 to support those police officers. I suspect that the black community will feel pretty burnt by that, and it feels like you're not supported in your efforts.
It's pretty unusual what's going on. The full verdicts of that hearing isn't out yet. There's some, I think some people are confused about it because 4 officers said they smelt cannabis. The panel, I think, have believed 2 and disbelieved 2 others, which I don't yet understand the reasons for that. The panel also said that there were no findings in relation to anything to do with racism in the case as well. So I think so when you see what comes out, but if officers have been dishonest, they clearly shouldn't be in the force. That's absolutely without doubt.
Let me just, if I may, take you on for our last minute or so to an issue that doesn't hit the news very often, though, in my view, you know this, should be in the news pretty much every day. For the past decade, at least 100 young black men have died in stabbing, pretty much every year, usually at the hands of other young black men. The reason I raised the Bianca Williams issue is that, from the black community's point of view, police seem to be able to find time to arrest people because they smell of cannabis, but can't seem to stop what are basically black children still being killed on the streets of London. What's the plan to fix that?
So the numbers are down. If I look at sort of stabbings, sort of violence between young people, weapon-enabled violence is down. But the thing you hit upon concerns me deeply. I think because of all the tensions around race, because police and black communities don't have a great history, there's lots we've got wrong over time in that, we are not fronting up to this issue, which is beyond policing. In the last decade, a young black man is 13 times more likely to be murdered than a young white man growing up in London. That is a disgrace. We got so energised in COVID when potentially there was 2 times disproportionality about deaths of some black and Asian minority communities, and yet no one is prepared to talk about this. This is about, it needs to be about education, it's about youth services, and it's partly about policing. And people are, I think, afraid to surface it. And I'm glad you say it in such frank terms. So what I'm trying to do with the black community and the meetings I have with different community groups, faith leaders, and sort of those working in communities is very much, they come to me with 2 things. There's a question about trust. We want you to do better in terms of how you stop and search our young people, and we're trying to improve that. But we're really upset. We're losing too many of young people. We want more policing, and we want it different, and that's what we're trying to do. There's a real tension there. But they're really upset about this. But people are afraid to talk about the disproportionate death of young black men in London, and I'm grateful you raised it.
Well, let's take some time on another programme to talk about this. So, Mark Rowley, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Trevor.
Now, in just a moment, we'll hear once again from our panel.
Yeah, so as you can imagine, my first day out of prison, although I still had 2.5 years left to serve, I was in an open prison, and I'd been invited to Fishmongers all that day by Learning Together, and yeah, I was happy, you know, it was my first taste of freedom. I was heading to London, the centre of London, to this beautiful building, sun was shining, and I was surrounded by great people. You know, what a way to spend your first day out of prison. And about 2 hours into that conference, screams cut through the air, which we know what happened after that.
Yeah, that was the first indication that something was wrong. Your prison guard went to investigate and told you to stay put. but you could hear what was going on, and you decided to go downstairs, and the scene that greeted you was chaos. What was happening?
Well, yeah, I mean, I'd been told to stay put, but as the screams continued, I thought I'd best go and investigate. So I go downstairs and I see two young ladies laid on the floor, lots of blood coming from them, and clearly in a terrible, terrible state. And I looked ahead of me and I saw husband Khan stood there with two 8-inch razor-sharp knives strapped to his hands. And I thought, well, clearly you're responsible for this. So as I've said before, I didn't hesitate. I took him on, and my aim was really just to keep him at bay, just to keep him occupied or take him to the ground until the police arrived.
Just reading a quote from your book, because you've written about this, The Road to London Bridge. It's your memoir almost, it's about more than what happened on that day. It's the path that got you there and the path afterwards. But you talk about the fact that you were being rehabilitated in prison and you made a vow. You were in prison for murdering someone.
Yes.
And once in prison, you made a vow never to commit an act of violence again. Yet you found yourself doing that on that day in defence of others. How did that sit with you? How did you feel?
Well, I mean, you're right. I went to prison for committing a very serious offence, and I lost a lot. I lost my freedom. I'd upset people. I lost my freedom. So, yeah, I made this vow to not use violence again and educate myself. So, yeah, coming to the contrast between that initial offence and that, saving someone's life is huge, isn't it? But I guess it's just become part of me. That story it's just a decision I made, and it was the right decision to make that day. So I capture it, in this book in quite in some detail. But what happened and how I made that change whilst in the system.
To our panel now, Lionel Barber, Stephanie Flanders and Sir Mark Lyle-Grant. Lionel, what did you make of what Mark Rowley had to say about this issue of trust and confidence?
Well, I think he's in a professional doing a very difficult job at an extremely tense time. In the background, of course, people are being inflamed by what they're seeing on television, in social media, polarisation. There's a strong Muslim community in this country. On the other hand, also a strong Jewish community. And feelings are running high. The police have got a very difficult job, indeed, on where to find the lines enforcing the law. Not helped when politicians, of course I can't possibly name names, start grandstanding.
Brother who?
But micromanaging the Met. And it really isn't good enough. I think the police, when he said, we're doing a difficult job, we are arresting people, we're trying to enforce the law, I took him at his word.
No, I mean, you have to, you watch him and you just, and we talked about this earlier, I mean, it's a blooming difficult job. And I think this question of context we keep coming back to, and I think that was the point he was trying to make in the definition of a hate crime, that there's guidance on what a hate crime is, whether it is a fundamentally extreme and incisive act, depends on where it is, who's doing it, what's going on around them. And that's what these policemen are having to judge, policemen and women are having to judge.
Well, of course, on all these issues, what we're seeing is division in society based on who you are and where you stand. And talking to Peter Kyle about Labour's problem, I think they've got quite a tricky situation. They've got, whatever it is, a dozen, maybe more MPs, most of whom have large Muslim communities in their constituencies. This is going to be quite a hard one for them to unravel.
And hard, we can't see now how it's going to unfold, but if you think back, it seems a million years ago now, but if you think back to the party conferences, and there was a sort of question in the air of what could now stop Keir Starmer's sort of glide path to number 10. This could. I mean, we may not be able to see exactly how now, but this does potentially have a really corrosive effect in a lot of communities. I think there's as many as 30 seats, which, if you're just doing the numbers, could be dependent on
Muslim. If you counted the number of Muslim voters and the majority.
But rooting out anti-Semitism in the Labour Party, it took root under Jeremy Corbyn, that is a test of Keir Starmer's leadership, and why I think he has to stay where he is at the moment.
Mark, part of your responsibilities as National Security Advisor wasn't just what's happening abroad, but what's happening internally. I noticed, interestingly, that Mark Rowley spoke in passing about Iranian influence here. Is that something we should be worried about?
Certainly we should be worried about. I mean, there's a lot of hostile states out there that are trying to stir up hatred, extremism in this country. I mean, and also gain influence. You've got the Chinese with the embassies and the Confucius Institutes. You've got the Russians extremely active, stirring up divisions, involving themselves in elections. And you've got the Iranians who are funding some of the more extreme views in the UK. So the Met Police, I mean, it's more the intelligence services than the Met Police, have to keep an eye on all these issues. But I think the point of context that came up earlier is a really important one. I was struck by the Hizb ut-Tahrir demonstration outside the Israeli embassy calling for jihad. Now, as we all know, jihad has a lot of different meanings. And this is why I think it's very difficult to sort of get the law right on extremism. Because if you say mentioning jihad in public is illegal, I mean, that's crazy. But clearly, if you're standing outside the Israeli embassy, jihad has a very definite anti-Israeli meaning.
Before we end, I want to come back to, situation on the ground. Mark, what do you think the Israeli endgame in reality could be here?
I think there are many within the Israeli military who would like essentially to clear Gaza entirely and for all the Palestinians to leave and go into the Sinai Peninsula in Egypt. That's not going to happen because the Egyptians are not going to allow that. I think, therefore, what we're seeing on the ground just in the last couple of days, and it is very early to judge exactly what the plan is, it seems to be different from previous land incursions into Gaza. They seem to be looking to clear completely of everyone, buildings, etc., in northern Gaza, maybe create a sort of buffer zone permanently. And that is something new we haven't seen before.
You agree with that, Lionel?
Well, I do. I think the north is where they want to... They want the civilians moved south, and they want to take out the military Hamas in the north. But the key thing is who's going to administer this entity afterwards. That's where the Arab nations are going to play a very important role, and the Palestinian Authority, neglected by Netanyahu.
It's partly down to Netanyahu that there is a lack of leadership there. He wanted to have no leader to work with because he didn't want there to be a live peace process.
A lot of sad, difficult events, but one sad, certainly for my generation, children, Chandler passing.
I'm channeling my inner Chandler. I mean, I remember watching... Did you like that one?
Very good.
With my daughter and my wife in New York 20 years ago, and we watched every night, and we could laugh at them, at Rachel and Joey and Chandler, but we also laughed at ourselves.
That's all a loss, isn't it?
I think we're in the same position. Our children are completely obsessed by Friends, and I didn't watch it first time round, but watching it again with them, I got quite hooked on it as well. It is a very well-written sitcom.
One for you, Stephanie.
New generations all the time are discovering it. But...
All right. Sad. Anyway, a quick reminder that the best way to set you up for the political week ahead, after watching us, of course, you can watch again on YouTube, is to listen to our great new podcast with our own Deputy Political Editor, Sam Coates, and Politico's UK Editor, Jack Blanchard. That's Politics at Jack and Sam's, every Sunday, wherever you get your podcasts. That is it for us. Goodbye. You can watch Sophie every night at 7 o'clock.